Jesus' baptism, and we hear God's words, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." In this story in the Gospel of Matthew, it's not just a statement God says to Jesus alone. It's one that's said in the midst of community. Jesus goes to be baptized by his cousin John at the river Jordan, this river that was so important to the Jewish people. This is the river that marked the grand passage from Egypt and the wilderness over to their new home in the promised land of Israel. This is where the prophets have gone to tell people to repent and to return to God. And it's in this river, surrounded by other people whose John is baptizing, that Jesus is baptized too. He does this as a matter of example for us and as a matter of incarnation. He teaches us by example, saying, "Follow me. See what I do, and you should do it too." In baptism, we hear the words for Jesus that God says, "You are my beloved child with whom I'm well pleased." And those words are meant for each of us also. For incarnation, Jesus' humanity was important. He was human so that he would know the same joys and sorrows that we know in our own living. And by going to be baptized by his cousin and to say that he too is a part of this path of repentance and bearing good fruit for God's world, he's just like each of us. And again, he leads us an example. Today's theme that we are in our journey of Epiphany is why Jesus? Because Jesus is relationship. I invite you to watch this video with me.
We had scheduled a trip, a business partner and I, to go to Rapid City, South Dakota, and we decided to use small aircraft to shrink the sales territory. This was the very first day you were able to fly civil aviation after 9/11. So private civil aviation came online on September 19, 2001. We left the Crystal Airport in the Northwest Metro. It was a cloudy day. The ceiling was about 800 feet that morning. But my business partner was a IFR-rated pilot, and we got up about 3,000 feet, and we were between two cloud banks. We had one low and one high. You couldn't see the ground, or you couldn't see blue sky, but you could see forever. And I said, if it's like this the whole way, this is going to be good. And shortly after that, I see the indicator that the oil light came on, and I looked down at the oil pressure and oil temperature. There was no oil pressure, and the temperature was rising. The motor started knocking. We radioed an SOS. My heart was racing a little bit here, but it was very calm. My business partner flew the airplane. We ended up in a cornfield. 3 days later, I woke up at Hennepin County Medical Center with some very close friends around the bed. And started questioning where I was and what I was doing there, and started the process of people showing up in my life. And I'm a member of a big Catholic family, but then there's this great church family that we're involved in too that showed up. And the people that some of the strongest friendships our family has today are because of my accident and people showing up to help us, and we continue to pay that forward as a family and as me as an individual. So my injuries were a serious concussion. I had a broken back. I broke my back in 3 places in the lumbar. I was in a TLSO brace for 18 weeks, and I broke both of my feet. So I was in a wheelchair for a while and had to live in a rehab center for about a week and a half at NAP Rehab, which is part of Hennepin County Medical Center. Those people do a fantastic job. And one day a social worker showed up and asked me what I thought of the rehabilitation they were working with me on, and I said, a week and a half ago I didn't know this place existed. So I don't know what to expect out of you, but here's what you can expect out of me. No pity parties. And I'm going to do whatever I can to get back to some semblance of normal. And basically, I have to tell you that forgiveness plays a role in this because it was a mechanic's mistake that put us in that precarious situation. And without the miracle of forgiveness, I'd be a different person. And forgiveness, I've learned, is one of the most underrated and undervalued gifts God gives us. The experience of going through this process, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but I would not take the experience away from me, because it did change me and it gave me a steel resolve. And I have to tell you, the best part about recovery is you get to. Other than that, it's hard work. So why Jesus showed up in this relationship is the people that were put in my life and the strong, lifelong friendships that were cemented that during this experience. And I have to tell you that Jesus is relationship.
That was John Miller, a member of First Lutheran Church in Columbia Heights, where our former senior pastor, Pastor Bonnie, is a pastor now. Thank you for listening to John's story this morning. John's story about relationship and forgiveness interlinked with our story of Jesus' baptism, and that Jesus is here for relationship, reminded me of a poem that was important to me when I was a teenager. In our life, as we know, we have times in which the waters of our life can be serene and peaceful, like the stillness of a lake in the morning when the dawn is rising. And when, I hope for Pastor John's sake, the fishing is good, but also that sometimes the waters in our life can be choppy. They can be moments when we are clinging to a boat in choppy waters, wondering how we're going to make it through and where God is. For me, this poem from the Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul was given to me by a hospital chaplain when I was sick as a child. It's called The Oyster. There once was an oyster whose story I tell, who found that some sand had gotten into his shell. It was only a grain, but it gave him great pain, for oysters have feelings, although they're so plain. Now, did he berate the harsh workings of fate that had brought him to such a deplorable state? Did he curse at the government, cry for election, and claim that the sea had given him protection? No, he said to himself as he lay on his shell. Since I cannot remove it, I shall try to improve it. Now the years have rolled around, and as the years always do, and he came to his ultimate destiny, stew. And the small grain of sand that had bothered him so was a beautiful pearl, all richly aglow. Now the tale has a moral, for isn't it grand what an oyster can do with a morsel of sand? What couldn't we do if we'd only begin with some of the things that get under our skin? As I think about John's story, and I heard his words about who Jesus is to him and the role of forgiveness in that, as well as the role of those relationships, and what it means for him in his own following Jesus, the own waters of baptism, to claim that he is God's beloved child and that others are too. He continues to be open to those relationships and the unexpected healing. There is grittiness in that sand that entered his oyster. And yet he tried to keep working to improve it, and a beautiful pearl came out in relationships with his family and his church community and his own relationship with God. In my own life, I have been blessed to have someone special, in addition to my parents, who I love greatly, and my husband, who I love greatly. But I have a best friend named Andrea, and I hope you each have a best friend somewhere who can be this person to you. She is the person in my life who tells me most often that I am God's beloved child, and that I am claimed by God, unique as all of these different shells, as unique as our kids, and that God made me to be me. But Andrea and my relationship was not always one of tight friends. When we first met in college, she was the sand in my oyster. She was that grittiness. I did not like her and she did not like me. And yet we were forced to live in the same dorm right next to each other. And through events and a very ambitious RA who felt we needed to be friends, we kept getting thrown together for college projects. Until finally one day, we both just looked at each other and said, I don't really like you. I don't like you either. But we kept having to work together, and we were made to be in relationship. As the months went by, I found out that she and I had the same love of books, that we both loved spending time with our parents, and our parents had instilled a great love of adventure and nature in our hearts. And so we ended up going on adventures together, canoeing in the Minnesota River, climbing buildings at Gustavus, doing a bunch of things I do not recommend that someone do. But it was a fun time, and we became the best of friends. Until, as sometimes happens, a young man entered our lives, and a love triangle developed. Both of us liked the same guy, and the same guy liked us, and he didn't know how to make a choice. If you know the Katy Perry Hot and Cold song, that was Justin. He was hot and cold and couldn't make a decision, and neither could we. And so we moved forward for a long time, the three of us as best buds spending time together. But our friendship between Andrea and I began to fray because we were focused on something else, not our own relationship. As we came into our junior year, we were barely speaking to each other, even though we had been best friends for a long time. And somehow, even though we were barely speaking, we ended up on a road trip together. We decided the best thing for our relationship would be to be stuck in a car and go to the Badlands and Black Hills and drive all the way there and tent and camp in March out in the Dakotas. Our parents thought we were crazy, and we were. And as we sang along to all of these kind of rock and, those girls where they're angry at the boys, those kind of broken heart rock and roll songs along the way, we got out to the Badlands, and we hiked along until suddenly we turned to each other and said, I hate you, and I hate you. And we threw mud at each other, and we had a big girl fight, which you can imagine. And then we began to laugh, and we began to cry, and we hugged. Those moments of forgiveness that come about not easily. Sometimes it's a lot of grit to get towards a pearl. Andrea and I are still best friends. She is my daughter's godmother. She was my maid of honor, and I was hers. She, if something happens to me, is the person who will raise my baby. She and I moved on in our relationship. And a couple years later, when I ended my relationship with my long-term college boyfriend, and my heart was broken, she said, I know just the thing. Let's go to San Francisco and spend a few weeks with Justin. And so, to an ex, I went to heal from an ex. And in this long, convoluted story, I had a lot of healing and reconciliation that came about. Grit that had never been addressed over the years, unspoken words, hard feelings, things that we had been scared to say to one another when we were 19 years old. At 22, we could say more freely. Through a long hike, we ended up sharing of our stories, our faith, working out and rehashing everything that happened, until we ended up at the ocean in Marin County, near George Lucas's ranch. We got to the beach where there are seashells, and we spent time talking and laughing and reminiscing. We had worked through our issues on this long hike. As we sat there on this beautiful day, I looked at them with impulsiveness in my heart and said, why don't we go swimming? And they said, we don't have any swimming gear. And I said, who cares? Let's just go. And into the water we waded and we ran, and the joy of baptismal water came over us. The joy of splashing about, of being claimed as beloved by one another. Because we know we're beloved when we're in relationship. It takes friends like Andrea and Justin to remind me of who I am. To be set free. To be set free from the grittiness of hurts, of past, of things. To be set free and say we can move on and continue our relationship stronger than ever and maintain our friendship together. And to see God's belovedness in them and all of the creation around us. It was a good day, a day of splashing and waiting and playing. The things that had hurt me, those grittiness, the unknowns, were this beautiful pearl of relationships that sustain me to this day. What is the grittiness in your life, today or in the past, that you are longing for God's forgiveness or healing for, or for that of another? Who are the people in your lives who remind you that you are God's beloved one? Who says to you, I forgive you, you are set free? In the waters of baptism, God reminds us that you are God's beloved child, with whom God is well pleased, and that indeed you have been washed and set free to be you and to be in relationship with one another. Why Jesus? Because Jesus is relationship. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.